Since we still have a handful of key RFAs going through the NHL arbitration process, I thought it'd be fun to take a look back at some history or the top 5 cases where NHL teams have walked away from arbitration awards to NHL players, thus making them a UFA. Plus, we're going to take a look at the largest arbitrator award ever handed out in NHL history. All that coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams. So if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top here, we still have some key RFAs going through the arbitration process, and we could have some pretty significant arbitration awards handed out here over the next coming days and week or so here as this all gets completed. During one of my previous videos where we looked at the NHL arbitration rules and the history and how it all came to be, something that came up a lot in the comment section was asking me about some history and cases where this has actually happened. So I thought it'd be fun just to put together a full video here or give you some of the most recent cases on how it all came to be. So let's jump in here. The first one we're going to discuss is Brian Berard back in 2003 with the Boston Bruins. Now, some of you may remember Brian Berard was originally drafted #1 overall back in 1995 by the Ottawa Senators. After being drafted, he later went to training camp that fall with the team, then the team opted to send him back to junior. Now, because of that, I guess he felt he was NHL ready, became a disagreement with the team, so then he became to have concerns over how the team was being managed and the decisions being made, etc. So he ended up requesting a trade, ended up getting traded to the New York Islanders, which actually brought the Senators Wade Redden, who was one of their all-time greatest defensemen. So really, the deal did work out well for both clubs. But a few years down the road, Brian Berard ended up in Boston. Obviously, Berard was a pretty gifted offensive defenseman during his time. During the 2002-2003 NHL season, he played 80 games for the Bruins, putting up 10 goals and 28 assists for 38 points. So he certainly had a pretty solid season. Ended up going to arbitration with the Boston Bruins as they couldn't come to an agreement on a contract extension. The arbitrator ended up awarding Berard a 1-year deal of $2.5 million, which the Boston Bruins thought was too much, decided to walk away, and thus making him an unrestricted free agent. Brian Berard went on to sign with the Chicago Blackhawks shortly after, but it was after the season started, so he did miss some time, but he signed a 1-year deal at $2 million. So obviously he didn't get the full 2.5. Therefore, it goes to show that some other teams obviously agreed that $2.5 million was obviously too much money as well. Next up, we have Corey Stillman playing at the time for the Tampa Bay Lightning back in 2004. This arbitration case comes right after the Tampa Bay Lightning had won the Stanley Cup, and Corey Stillman was a pretty important player to the Lightning during that time. During that season where the Tampa Bay Lightning won the Stanley Cup, he ended up playing 81 games, putting up 80 points. So he was basically a point-per-game player, produced a lot of offense for the Lightning. And because of that great offensive season, he was awarded a 1-year deal of $3.9 million, which the Tampa Bay Lightning then later rejected, of course, making him a UFA. Now, of course, this is all happening around the time of the lockout, so things kind of stalled a little bit. But he ended up later signing, once hockey got going back again, with the Carolina Hurricanes, and he ended up signing a 3-year contract. During his first season with the Carolina Hurricanes, they also won the Stanley Cup, kind of putting him in a little bit of unique history here in the NHL. At the time, he was the 11th player in NHL history to win the Stanley Cup in back-to-back seasons, but playing for different NHL clubs. Next up, we have Nikolai Zherdev back in 2009 playing with the New York Rangers. Now, of course, he originally got started with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and after playing there for a few years, kind of wore out his welcome. Obviously, Zherdev kind of had some issues with the Blue Jackets on and off the ice here between management and coaching. They just seemed to be a disconnect there, not really getting along the greatest. During the 08-09 season for the Rangers, he played in 82 games and put up 58 points, so he had a pretty solid year, really, for the New York Rangers. They ended up going through arbitration where he was awarded a $3.9 million contract. So obviously the Rangers felt that that was too rich for their blood, opted to walk away. Zherdev did not sign another NHL contract. He actually ended up going to play over in Russia during the KHL. After one season over in the KHL, he made his triumphant NHL return, which did not really last all that long. He signed a contract with the Philadelphia Flyers, came back, only played in 56 games, and then ended up going back to play overseas, and his NHL career at that point in time basically came to an end. Next up, we have Antti Niemi back in 2010 after winning the Stanley Cup again with the Chicago Blackhawks. So this is the second player on our list going into an arbitration case here after becoming a Stanley Cup champion. So obviously Niemi's role within the team kind of grew throughout the season. He did have some pretty impressive statistics though. Niemi put up a record of 26-7-4 during the regular season and then went 16-6 during the playoffs, becoming only the third Finnish netminder to capture the Stanley Cup. Obviously Chicago had a great year. He was a big part of it. But then after that, obviously during the offseason, things kind of got a little bit hectic between the two and they could not come to an agreement on a contract. Because they couldn't come to a contract agreement, they ended up going through the NHL arbitration process, and obviously things did not end well. Antti Niemi's contract award by the arbitration was then rejected by the Chicago Blackhawks, making him an unrestricted free agent. He then went on to sign a 4-year contract with the San Jose Sharks. Niemi's time in San Jose was reasonably productive as well, and obviously, as we know, Niemi's still playing today, currently under contract here with the Montreal Canadiens. Next up, we have Clarke MacArthur, at the time playing for the Atlanta Thrashers, who would now become obviously the Winnipeg Jets. Obviously, MacArthur started his career as a Buffalo Sabre, but during that season, during the 2009-2010 season, he was traded from Buffalo to the Atlanta Thrashers near the NHL trade deadline. Combining MacArthur's totals between his time in Buffalo as well as the Thrashers that year, he played in 81 games and put up 16 goals and 19 assists for 35 points. After going through the arbitration process, Clarke MacArthur was then awarded a contract of $2.4 million, which the Thrashers opted to reject. Of course, MacArthur went on to become an unrestricted free agent, later signed a 1-year deal with the Toronto Maple Leafs at $1.1 million. Obviously, MacArthur then went on to extend that contract for 2 more years, staying with the Leafs for a total of 3 seasons before signing with the Ottawa Senators as an unrestricted free agent, which is where his career later ended due to injuries after having a series of concussions. So those are your top 5 cases where the NHL teams walked away from the awards given to NHL players. Now let it be known here as well, just to clarify, these are cases where the players elected the arbitration process. If the team elects for arbitration, then they have to accept the award given to the player at that point in time. Now, as I mentioned during the opener here, we're also going to have a little bit of a bonus feature here today. I also want to quickly discuss the largest award ever given through the arbitration process as well, which kind of resulted in a crazy contract to follow. Now, at that point in time, we're talking about 2011 here with the Nashville Predators and Shea Weber. Shea Weber was granted a $7.5 million contract through arbitration. He then later went on to have an absolutely fabulous season, putting up 19 goals and 49 points. And that's when the crazy offer sheet happened the following offseason from the Philadelphia Flyers. The Philadelphia Flyers offer sheet to Weber as a restricted free agent was a 14-year contract and $110 million, which is absolutely ridiculous. Thankfully, the NHL has changed the rules on those contract terms, and it's a fairly front-loaded contract as well. As we know, the Nashville Predators went on to match that contract and at the time not lose their franchise defenseman. Of course, since then, that contract now belongs to the Montreal Canadiens. And even though there's still many years left on that contract, Shea Weber is suffering a lot from injury issues. And it just goes to show that's a big part of the reason why the NHL changed the rules. Those contracts that were going on back then were absolutely crazy. Obviously, restricted free agent offer sheets is also not a common practice. We haven't seen much of anything since the Shea Weber offer sheet. Obviously, what's resulted here in an absolutely ridiculous contract that the Predators had to match. And really, I think that's a big part of the reason why that teams have kind of stayed away from the process ever since, is they don't want to get themselves into basically into cap hell because of the contract that they had to match to keep their star player. So I hope you enjoyed today's history lesson here, reviewing the arbitration process and some of the awards given out here in the past. So stay tuned here over the next coming days and weeks as the RFA arbitration process comes to an end and all these cases end up getting settled. Could we see some new records here for arbitration awards, or could we see any teams possibly walk away from some of these big mega deals that could possibly be awarded? When we still have guys like a Mark Stone and like a William Karlsson going through this process who had tremendous seasons, we could see some pretty hefty awards granted by the arbitrators this year. So we'll certainly be curious to see how those deals rank compared to the others here in recent NHL history. So I hope you enjoyed today's history lesson. If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there is plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, hit the like button as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll catch you next time.